many years ago, when I was working in the technology field, I had to send a computer tape to San Juan, Puerto Rico, from Michigan. And we put data on tape in those days. And I sent it to UPS, to the post office, and it was sent back because I had not included a customs form. Now, the people who sent it back to me were not aware of the fact that Puerto Rico is a part of the United States, as I'm sure all of you know. The fact is, many Americans still do not know that Puerto Rico is part of the United States, which is a failure of our educational systems and of our media. And our next guest has written a piece about another, very related failure of our media following the hurricane disaster there. Jodi Jacobson is president and editor-in-chief of Rewire.News, where she leads a team of editors and journalists. They report on health, human rights, and justice. And she's been on the program before. She is a friend of the Zero Hour. At least we consider her a friend, and she joins us now. So first of all, Jodi, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thank you so much for having me. We're delighted to be here.
Well, we're delighted to have you. And, you know, you wrote this piece, headline, More Americans Died from Hurricane Maria Than 9/11. Does Anyone Care? And rather than me summarize your point of view or what you have to say briefly, you know, your thesis here was?
Well, bottom line is that, you know, we react to certain tragic events with an outpouring of compassion and attention, and sometimes with follow-up, right? Not always, but sometimes with follow-up. In this case, we had thousands of Americans dying and also injured and left without water, without electricity, without food for months on end, nearly a year, and we sort of forgot about them. And many Americans don't even know that they are, in fact, U.S. citizens, that Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. And it's really terrible because what we've done is we've created a dividing line between Houston and Louisiana, which got lots of aid and attention from the Trump administration, and Puerto Rico, which was left to fend for itself and still has been left to fend for itself. And the new hurricane season started on June 1st. So my question was, we always talk about 9/11, as tragic as that was. We have many other kinds of deaths in this country from wholly preventable or wholly addressable events, and we don't do much about them. And I'm asking why.
And it's such an important question, and I think, one of the things I liked about your piece was that, it alludes to, among other things, personal responsibility, but, also the media questions, for those of us, and sort of our general progressive political leanings, it's very easy to see the horrors and hypocrisy of the Trump administration, which are, to be clear, very, very real. And it's very easy to see how Trump's worst characteristics of, racial animus and everything else might drive, as well as the politics of the situation and his natural constituencies and so on, might drive Trump to do as he did and offer so much support and even empathy to the people of, for example, Houston, and to the people of Puerto Rico. And that's very worthy of criticism, don't get me wrong. But then there's a whole question of, what might broadly be called our side. Well, what are we doing about Puerto Rico? How much is it in our consciousness, right? How much are we? Do you know what I'm trying to get at, Jodi?
You mean in the progressive consciousness?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a very valid question, and I think that right now, I think we'd have to divide up who we're talking about, right? I think if we're talking about the groups and the organized advocates and activists and the people who are doing legal work and sort of, the the people who are professionally trying to work on a progressive agenda. There are plenty of groups that are focused on Puerto Rico. In fact, when I wrote that article, I was speaking on the ground to people who were there at that moment working on rebuilding, who had come from the United States as part of a project to help rebuild. And many individuals have done the same without being part of any kind of movement. But, I think part of the issue that we face in terms of the sort of groups and the professionals that work on these things from all the different vantage points, legally, policy, is that we're all overwhelmed with the number of tragedies we are facing, from what's happening to children on the border, to the poisoning of the environment by the EPA, to, deportations. There's so many things happening at once that it's difficult for all of us together to be focused on one calamity. As a progressive movement, if you will. That's, I think, different than maybe the folks who are in their communities who are voting maybe in terms of progressive policies, but haven't maybe organized themselves as much on any one of these issues. And I really didn't explore that, so I can't critique, say enough about that in terms of really having any legitimacy. I don't know that groups are not doing those things. I do know that the government, which is supposed to take care of our people, has not done so. And I do know that there are people advocating for the government to do more. But I see this as part of the broader white supremacy that this government represents by leaving Puerto Ricans, which even President Trump has alluded to there not being real Americans, alone in this fight. It's not really possible without government resources.
First of all, I think you make a great point about the tragedies hitting us from all sides. And I was talking to a friend just yesterday, actually, about the fact that, in a sense, and it's a dangerous analogy, but I think it's a valid one, that progressives are it's almost like being in an abusive environment where you never know where the next shocking statement, the next act of brutality, the next unexpected disturbance of the moral order is going to come from. So I didn't mean to be too rough on the progressive community at all. I was just kind of reflecting on that as we spoke, and I think you're absolutely right about the government's responsibility, the abject failure of responsibility here, which of course we had a similar failure under George W. Bush during the Katrina and the aftermath of the Katrina disaster in New Orleans, and I think also of the media's role in all this, the fact that look, 9/11 was horrific. I literally lost friends that day. But that was drummed into our consciousness constantly, whereas Puerto Rico, it's getting almost, it's gotten very little coverage. So I think we have a government that's neglecting them. Do we have a media that's neglecting Puerto Rico too, I guess is my question.
Absolutely. I absolutely think the media is neglecting Puerto Rico as a longer term issue. Again, I think 9/11 was easy in a sense because it fed into the narrative of the other. And the other were terrorists, Muslims, Islamists, all the people that we consider the other. And we are very quick to choose others that are, a threat. But here, in a sense, we are the threat to our own citizens. And in many ways, I could cite many problems that, live up to that standard in my head. But here, we've got a part of our country, our citizens, that are left without resources. Yes, I think the media has neglected Puerto Rico, except for kind of the highlights, right? Like the report that came out from Harvard and all that other stuff. And we aren't seeing, I have seen some on MSNBC, but I don't see it regularly in other media, continuing going back to Puerto Rico, seeing what's really happening there, really reporting consistently from the ground, interviewing people who still don't have food and water. I was talking to people who were on the ground, for example, with, as I said earlier, with a group that was doing reparations or rather repairs and home building. And I was told by one of the folks there that a transgender couple that was in the community they were working in was living in a house that still had no roof. They were living under a tarp. They were not able to get any assistance from the government under FEMA because apparently the home was from the grandparents or owned originally by the grandparents of one of the people in that home who were deceased, and the paperwork wasn't available because why would it be available after the hurricane? There's nothing there. So they can't get any assistance from FEMA, and they're living under a tarp. And now and that's only one story. So it's just we are not set up. We no longer have what I would call, caring capacity for ourselves. We have things that are bureaucratically led, but they're not humanly led, and we're not responding to the needs of real people. And these are our own citizens.
Yeah, it's so important, and it's what's the solution? You mentioned, and again, we're talking with Jodi Jacobson, editor-in-chief of Rewire.News. What's the solution? You mentioned the mayor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz, who has been and continues to be very outspoken. She's succeeded in my opinion, at times, breaking through the media blackout, even breaking through the kind of empathy paralysis that people sometimes sink into by giving a face to the issue, by talking concretely about what people are experiencing. But she's almost like a flickering spark in the darkness with, so much to contend with to try to get this story through. What's the solution? How can we reconnect as individuals and as a community so that we do more for our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico?
Well, I think we need more Carmen Yulín because she, I was told by people on the ground that she weathered through all of the immense attacks on her that were gender-based attacks on her as an outspoken woman, calling her a liar when she was trying to, represent her people. I was told by folks on the ground that because she persevered, she was able to garner and get resources to the ground faster than the governor, who was so clearly sidling up to President Trump the entire time. And I think we need more people like her. The whole point in any of this, as a journalist or as the mayor of a city, is to speak truth to power in the service of people, right? And so she did that, and we need more people like her, whether it be people in our country, and I mean, of course, we've got lots of them now working across so many sectors, from Reverend Barber to, the people that are putting themselves on the line every day to get arrested in order to save immigrants from deportation. There's so many people out there working hard, but the task is huge, and all of us need to look inside ourselves and say, this is not somebody else. It's not going to be somebody else that's going to save us. It's not going to be somebody else that's going to take care of us. It's going to be each of us insisting that the government be accountable, that the powers that be responsive. And it's going to be each of us responsible for that. So I think we need more people like her in that regard.
And I completely agree. And holding the government accountable includes, in my mind, calling out the white supremacist nature, as you do, of the Trump administration. It includes calling out the horrific neoliberal economic anti-democratic program they put in place for Puerto Rico, which, as you point out, was a joint effort of the Republican Congress and the Obama administration. Appalling, in my view. And it means...
it was appalling.
Yeah, and it means somehow retaining the sense of, as paradoxical as it's going to sound, and maybe I'll close with this, somehow the sense of optimism and joy so that we can get through every day as we fight these headwinds, so that we can help in Puerto Rico and do all the other things we want to do as a movement and as a community. What do you think?
I agree. I think, you know, my job and my sort of personal inclination always is to hold people accountable. I don't care who they are. I don't care whether they're Democrat, Republican, the Green Spaghetti Monster. If they're in power, they should be held accountable. And I think we don't do enough of that. And I think that it's why we get to the places that we go, because it seems like it becomes, you know, real, that it seems like we're willing to tolerate, you know, if you don't mind the word, bullshit on the part of our own representatives or our own party, but not on the part of the other party. But what happens is that people become increasingly disaffected. And I think that's what we saw in this last election. And part of that, again, goes to holding people accountable for what they're doing, no matter who they are, and asking, who does this really serve? Whose best interest does this really serve? And in that case, and in the cases of a lot of stuff we've seen, it doesn't really serve the people.
Well, I couldn't agree more on absolutely on holding those in power accountable, no matter whether they're wearing our team's colors or the other team's colors. And if we do that enough, things will start to change. So thanks for writing this great piece, which can be found in Rewire.News, and Jodi Jacobson, editor-in-chief of Rewire.News. Thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you so much again for having me. Delighted to join you.